They say destiny never knocks twice, but on the coldest night of my life, it pounded on my door like it was running out of time. The wind howled against the walls of my little rental house outside Asheville, North Carolina, rattling the old windows hard enough to make me glance up from the pile of laundry on my couch. Snow had been falling for hours, thick white sheets swallowing the road, the trees, and every sign of civilization beyond my front porch. Most people were home with family that night. I was home with overdue bills, a half-empty refrigerator, and my 6-year-old daughter sleeping beneath 3 blankets in the room down the hall. Being a single mom meant you learned how to ignore loneliness. You learned how to smile through exhaustion and keep moving because somebody smaller depended on you. I checked the clock on the microwave. 2:17 a.m. Then came the sound. 3 heavy knocks. Not polite, not hesitant, desperate. My entire body froze. Nobody visited this far out in the mountains, especially during a storm like this. Another knock echoed through the house, then another. My stomach tightened. Every warning my mother ever taught me rushed into my head at once. Don't open the door for strangers. Don't trust people in the middle of the night. Don't invite trouble inside. I grabbed my phone from the counter and walked toward the front window. Snow blasted sideways across the porch light, making it hard to see anything beyond the glass. At first, I thought nobody was there. Then a shape moved. A tall man stood near the steps, one arm wrapped around a small child. Even from inside, I could tell something was wrong. The man swayed slightly as if struggling to stay upright. The child looked completely exhausted, his face pressed against the stranger's shoulder. I cracked the door open just enough to speak. The freezing air hit me instantly. "Can I help you?" My voice sounded smaller than I intended. The man lifted his head. The porch light revealed dark hair dusted with snow and sharp features that looked carved from stone. His face was pale. His eyes were alert despite obvious exhaustion. He wasn't old, maybe mid-30s, definitely not someone who belonged out here in a snowstorm. "Please," he said quietly. "My son needs somewhere warm." His voice carried authority even when weakened by cold. My eyes shifted to the little boy. He couldn't have been older than 7. Snowflakes clung to his dark eyelashes. His cheeks were red from the cold. For a second, I saw my own daughter in his place, alone, frightened, vulnerable. The decision should have been difficult. It wasn't. I opened the door wider. "Get inside." The man hesitated, almost like he wasn't used to accepting help. Then he stepped across the threshold carrying the boy. Snow melted onto my hardwood floor. The warmth of the house wrapped around them immediately. The child stirred slightly in his arms. His eyes opened for barely a second. He looked at me, then toward the hallway where my daughter slept. His lips moved weakly. One word escaped before his eyes closed again. "Dad." And for reasons I couldn't explain, the way that man looked down at his son made me realize the storm outside wasn't the only thing chasing them that night. I led them into the living room, while snow hammered against the windows, hard enough to make the glass tremble. The little electric fireplace in the corner struggled to push warmth through the house, but it was better than the storm outside. The boy remained asleep as the man carefully lowered him onto my couch. Up close, I could see how exhausted they both were. Snow clung to their coats. Their shoes were soaked. The child's small hands looked almost frozen. "Take these off," I said, pointing at their wet jackets. The man nodded once. He moved with controlled precision, even though he looked like he had not slept in days. I disappeared into the hallway closet and returned with spare blankets. When I came back, He was helping the boy out of his coat with a gentleness that surprised me. Powerful men were not usually careful. This man was. His name is Oliver, he said quietly. It was the first personal thing he had shared. I am Emma. He gave a slight nod. Sebastian. I expected a last name. He did not offer one. Something about that told me he was used to keeping parts of himself hidden. I wrapped Oliver in 2 blankets and checked his forehead. Cold, but not alarming. Thank goodness. My heart finally slowed. Sebastian watched every movement. Not suspicious. Protective. Like a father who had spent too long carrying the weight of the world by himself. You should sit down, I told him. You look worse than he does. For the first time, something almost resembling amusement flickered across his face. Almost. Then it vanished. He lowered himself into the armchair beside the couch. The moment he stopped moving, the exhaustion became obvious. Dark circles under his eyes, tension in his shoulders, the kind of fatigue that sleep alone could not fix. I heated canned chicken soup on the stove and made 2 grilled cheese sandwiches. Not exactly gourmet food, but it was what I had. When I returned, Sebastian was staring into the fire, lost somewhere far away. Here. He looked down at the tray. Thank you. His voice sounded rough, genuine. I sat across from him. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the storm outside and Oliver's steady breathing. Then Sebastian reached for the spoon. His hand shook slightly, barely noticeable. But I noticed. He froze when he realized I had seen it. Embarrassment crossed his face, then frustration, then nothing. The wall came back up. You should rest too, I said softly. Nobody is going anywhere until morning. His eyes lifted to meet mine. They were striking, green, sharp, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. For a second, I felt as though he was studying me the same way I had been studying him. Then his gaze shifted toward the hallway, toward my daughter's room. You have a child. A daughter. Sophie. Something changed in his expression. A sadness so brief I almost missed it. Before I could ask about it, Oliver stirred beneath the blankets. The little boy opened his eyes halfway and looked directly at me. Then he smiled. A small smile. Fragile. Trusting. And somehow that simple smile made Sebastian go completely still. The smile lasted less than a second, but it changed something in the room. Oliver looked at me as though we had known each other longer than a few hours. Then his eyes drifted toward the hallway. Who lives here? He asked, his voice soft and sleepy. My daughter, I said. She is 6. Oliver nodded slowly before settling deeper into the blankets. Within moments, he was asleep again. I glanced at Sebastian. He had not taken his eyes off his son. Relief softened his features for the first time since he had stepped through my front door. It was strange. Until then, he had seemed larger than the room somehow. Controlled. Unshakable. But watching his son sleep made him look human. Just a father worried about his child. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I convinced Sebastian to take the guest room. At first he refused. Then I pointed out that falling asleep in an armchair was not exactly a brilliant plan. Eventually he gave in. I handed him extra blankets and showed him down the hall. He paused outside the room. You trust strangers too easily, Emma. I folded my arms. Maybe. Or maybe I trust exhausted fathers carrying freezing children through a snowstorm. For the first time, an actual smile appeared. Small. Brief. But real. Good night. Good night, Sebastian, The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, reflecting off fresh snow that covered everything for miles. The storm had passed. The world looked completely different. Peaceful. Quiet. Sophie burst into the kitchen before I could finish making pancakes. Her blonde curls bounced as she ran. "Mom, who is sleeping in our house?" I nearly dropped the spatula. "Lower your voice," she grinned. I saw a little boy. Of course she had. Children noticed everything. 30 minutes later, Oliver appeared in the doorway wearing one of my oversized sweatshirts. His dark hair was messy from sleep. Sophie stared at him. Oliver stared back. Neither spoke. Then Sophie pointed at the pancake batter covering my hand. "My mom burns the first pancake every time." Oliver blinked. "Really, every single time?" "Do not listen to her," I said. "That is an exaggeration." "It is not," Sophie declared proudly. To my surprise, Oliver laughed. A real laugh. Bright. Unforced. The sound seemed to freeze Sebastian in place. He had just entered the kitchen carrying a cup of coffee. For several seconds, he simply stood there listening. His eyes remained fixed on his son. The expression on his face was impossible to miss. Shock, gratitude, maybe even disbelief. Later, while the children built a blanket fort in the living room, I found Sebastian standing by the window watching them. Snow sparkled outside. Inside. Oliver was laughing again. "He seems happy," I said quietly. Sebastian did not answer immediately. His jaw tightened slightly. I have not seen him smile like that in 3 years. Something in his voice made my chest ache. I looked toward the living room where Sophie and Oliver were giggling over something only children could understand. Then I looked back at Sebastian. For the first time, I realized the storm had not simply brought strangers to my door. It had brought people carrying sadness far heavier than the snow outside. The rest of the day passed faster than it should have. By afternoon, the roads were finally clear enough for travel, and I could feel a strange tension settling over the house. The kind that comes when everyone knows something is ending, but nobody wants to say it out loud. Sophie and Oliver spent hours building towers from old board games and couch cushions while I cleaned the kitchen. Every few minutes I caught Sebastian watching them, not speaking, just watching, as if he were trying to memorize every laugh his son made inside these walls. Around 4 o'clock, Oliver wandered into the kitchen holding one of Sophie's stuffed animals. "Do we have to leave?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. Before I could answer, Sebastian stepped into the room behind him. His expression remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. Oliver looked between us. "I like it here." My heart squeezed. "You can visit someday," I said gently. Oliver seemed unconvinced. He lowered his head and walked back toward the living room. Silence followed him. Sebastian stared after his son for several seconds. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For giving him something I could not." I frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" He glanced toward the children. "Peace." The word lingered between us. Before I could ask another question, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. He removed a card and placed it on the counter. No company name, no address, only a phone number. "If you ever need anything, call." I looked down at it. "Sebastian, I helped because it was the right thing to do." "I know." His voice softened. "That is exactly why I am grateful." An hour later, they were gone. I stood on the porch with Sophie beside me as a black SUV disappeared down the snow-covered road. Oliver waved through the window until the vehicle vanished behind a curve. The house felt strangely empty afterward. Too quiet. That night, while folding blankets in the guest room, I found something resting on the nightstand. A watch, not an ordinary watch. Heavy, elegant, expensive enough to probably cover a year's rent. I immediately knew it belonged to Sebastian. I picked it up and stared at it. There was no chance he had forgotten it accidentally. The man noticed everything. I placed it in a drawer, determined to return it somehow. 3 days passed. Life returned to normal. School drop-offs, grocery lists, bills, laundry. I started convincing myself the entire experience had been nothing more than a strange interruption in an ordinary life. Then, on the 4th morning, I heard engines outside, lots of them. I stepped onto the porch and froze. A line of black SUVs stretched across the snowy road in front of my house. At least 20. Men in dark suits stepped out one by one, and standing in the center of them all was Sebastian. Suddenly, my ordinary life no longer felt ordinary at all. My first instinct was to pull Sophie back inside and lock the door. Instead, I stood frozen on the porch while the cold mountain air stung my face. The line of black SUVs looked completely out of place on our quiet road. Neighbors who usually waved from a distance were peeking through curtains. Sebastian climbed out of the center vehicle, his dark coat moving in the wind. Every man around him seemed to wait for his signal before taking a single step. The contrast between that display of power and the exhausted father who had slept in my guest room made my head spin. Sophie appeared beside me and gasped. "Oliver!" she shouted. Before I could stop her, she ran down the porch steps. A second later, another rear door opened and Oliver jumped out. The two children raced toward each other like old friends reunited after months instead of days. The sight softened something in Sebastian's expression. For a moment, the intimidating convoy disappeared, and I saw the same father who had sat beside my fireplace watching his son smile. I crossed my arms. "You forgot something." I walked back inside, retrieved the watch from the drawer, and returned to the porch. When I held it out, Sebastian looked down at it but made no move to take it. "It belongs to you," I said. "No," he replied calmly. "It belonged to me." My patience immediately began to evaporate. "Sebastian, I am serious." "So am I." Tuzita, he finally accepted the watch, turning it once in his hand before slipping it into his pocket. "I came to thank you properly." I glanced at the line of vehicles stretching down the road. Most people send a card. A faint smile touched his face. Behind him, several men looked uncomfortable, as if nobody ever spoke to him that way. Most people did not save my son. The words landed harder than I expected. Before I could answer, another vehicle arrived and stopped near the convoy. A local contractor stepped out carrying a folder. Then another person arrived, and another. Confusion replaced irritation. I recognized one of them immediately. He owned the company that managed rental properties across 3 counties. "What is going on?" I asked. Sebastian looked toward my house. "You have a leaking roof, unreliable heating, and a landlord who has ignored your maintenance requests for 8 months. My stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know things." The contractor opened the folder and began discussing repairs. New insulation, new windows, a replacement heating system. I stared at them in disbelief. "Absolutely not." Everyone fell silent. Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly. "No. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. I am not accepting all of this." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Sebastian laughed softly, not mocking, not angry, genuinely amused. "You are the first person who has ever argued with me about receiving help." I lifted my chin. "Get used to it." His gaze held mine longer than necessary. Then he nodded once. Interesting. And somehow the way he said that single word made me feel as though this conversation was only the beginning. The convoy eventually left, but Sebastian did not disappear from my life the way I expected. Over the next 2 weeks, small things began happening around town. The hardware store suddenly delivered materials to repair my porch steps. The local mechanic refused to charge me for fixing a problem with my aging SUV. The elementary school called to inform me that an anonymous donor had funded a new reading program Sophie had been hoping for. Every time I asked questions, nobody seemed to know where the help was coming from. Every time I thought of Sebastian, every time I became more irritated. One Saturday afternoon, I finally dialed the number on the card he had given me. The call connected after a single ring. Emma. The fact that he recognized my voice immediately annoyed me even more. You need to stop. Silence. Then, stop what? Whatever this is. I paced across my kitchen while Sophie colored at the table. I do not need gifts. I do not need favors. I do not need someone solving my problems. A low chuckle reached my ear. You called just to argue with me. I called because you are impossible. To my surprise, he laughed again. A real laugh this time. Warm, unguarded. It sounded completely different from the controlled man who stepped out of black SUVs. Interesting, he said. There is that word again. Because you continue to surprise me. Before I could respond, another voice appeared in the background. Oh, Emma. My expression softened instantly. Oliver, can Sophie come visit? I looked at my daughter. She was already watching me with wide eyes. Somehow she knew exactly who was on the phone. A week later, I found myself driving into the city. The address Sebastian provided led to a massive estate hidden behind iron gates and towering trees. I almost turned around twice, maybe 3 times. Then Sophie spotted Oliver waiting near the entrance, and that ended any chance of leaving. The children ran toward each other like reunited siblings. Their laughter echoed across the grounds. I stood frozen near my vehicle, suddenly feeling very out of place. Sebastian approached wearing dark jeans and a simple sweater instead of a suit. Somehow that made him seem even more intimidating. You came. For the children, I corrected. Of course. We watched them race across the lawn together. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Oliver stumbled while running. Before I could react, Sebastian was already moving toward him. Concern flashed across his face so quickly and naturally that it caught me off guard. Oliver was completely fine, yet Sebastian still crouched beside him, checking on him carefully before helping him back to his feet. Watching them together made something click in my mind. For the first time, I stopped seeing the powerful man everyone else seemed to fear. I saw a father, a lonely one, and when Oliver reached up and grabbed his hand without hesitation, I realized the child trusted him completely. Somehow, that simple moment stayed with me long after the visit ended. The drive home should have cleared my thoughts. Instead, it left me with more questions than answers. For days afterward, I found myself thinking about Sebastian at the strangest moments. While packing Sophie's lunch, while folding laundry, while standing in line at the grocery store. It was not because of the wealth or the estate or the endless resources that seemed to follow him everywhere. It was because of the way he looked at his son. A few days later, my phone rang just after dinner. The screen displayed a number I recognized immediately. Emma, Sebastian said. His voice sounded different, tired. Is everything okay? Silence stretched for a moment. I am not sure. That answer surprised me. Men like Sebastian were supposed to have solutions for everything. What happened? I asked. He exhaled slowly. Oliver has not been sleeping well. Concern instantly replaced curiosity. Nightmares. Yes, I heard something fragile beneath his usual control. He keeps asking when he can see Sophie again. I smiled despite myself. That is probably a good sign. Perhaps. Another pause followed. Then he added quietly, "He asks about you too." My heart stumbled unexpectedly. Before I could respond, Sophie appeared beside me. The moment she heard Oliver's name, she practically took the phone from my hand. The children talked for nearly 20 minutes. Their conversation made no sense to me. Something about a blanket fort championship and a disagreement involving pancakes. Yet Oliver's laughter carried clearly through the speaker. When the call finally ended, Sebastian returned to the line. "Thank you. For letting two children talk, for making him happy." His words stayed with me long after the call ended. The following weekend, Sebastian invited us to a small gathering at the estate. Nothing formal, just lunch. Sophie accepted before I could finish considering it. By the time we arrived, Oliver was already waiting outside. The two children disappeared almost immediately. I found Sebastian standing alone near the edge of the property overlooking a frozen lake. Winter sunlight reflected across the ice. For several minutes, we simply watched the water. Then he spoke. My wife loved this view. The statement caught me off guard. He had never mentioned her before. His gaze remained fixed on the lake. She used to bring Oliver here every weekend. The sadness in his voice felt older than grief. It felt permanent. "I am sorry," I said softly. He nodded once. After she died, everything became work, responsibilities, survival. I convinced myself that was enough. He looked toward the house where children's laughter drifted through the cold air. "Then a snowstorm sent me to your front door." Something tightened in my chest. For the first time, I realized how much pain he carried beneath the confidence and authority everyone else saw. And for the first time, I wondered if opening that door had changed more than one life. The weeks that followed felt almost normal, which somehow made everything more dangerous. When happiness arrives unexpectedly, part of you keeps waiting for it to disappear. Spring began creeping into the mountains. Snow melted from the roads. The trees outside my house slowly turned green again. Yet for the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to things. Phone calls, weekend visits, the sound of Sophie laughing when Oliver came running through the door. One Friday afternoon, I was finishing paperwork at the kitchen table when my phone rang. It was Sebastian. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. His voice remained calm, but there was a tension beneath it I had never heard before. "Emma, where are you?" "At home." Silence followed. Then came a slow exhale. "Good." My stomach tightened immediately. "Sebastian, what happened?" "Nothing happened." The answer came too quickly. "Which means something definitely happened." Another pause. Finally, he said, "There are situations I am handling. I need you and Sophie to stay home tonight." Every instinct in my body woke up. What kind of situations? The kind that will pass. I hated that answer. "You are not telling me everything." "No." At least he was honest. Hours later, after sunset, headlights appeared outside my house. Not one vehicle, several. My pulse immediately spiked until I recognized the familiar black SUV in front. Sebastian stepped out before I could reach the porch. He looked exhausted, more exhausted than the night he arrived during the snowstorm. Sophie and Oliver ran toward each other the moment they saw one another. Neither child seemed aware of the tension surrounding the adults. Sebastian remained near the doorway, watching, waiting. "You brought Oliver here." "Yes." "Why?" His eyes found mine. "Because this is the safest place I know." The words hit harder than they should have. Before I could answer, Oliver ran back toward us carrying a drawing. "Look," he announced proudly. The picture showed 4 people standing in front of a small house beneath falling snow. Sophie pointed at each figure. "That is me. That is Oliver. That is my mom." Then she pointed to the last figure, "And that is Sebastian." The children smiled as though the picture represented the most obvious thing in the world. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, the children disappeared into the living room, leaving us alone on the porch. Evening light painted the mountains gold. Sebastian stared at the drawing still clutched in his hand. "I spent years building a life that looked successful from the outside." His voice was quiet. "Money, influence, responsibilities. Yet my son smiles more in your kitchen than he ever did in any place I owned." I looked at him carefully. For the first time, he seemed less like a man carrying power and more like a man carrying regret. "Sebastian." He shook his head gently. "You saved us long before you realized it. Emma." And standing there beneath the fading light, I suddenly understood that whatever had begun during that snowstorm had grown into something neither of us could walk away from. Summer arrived quietly. The mountains outside my house glowed green beneath endless blue skies, and for the first time in years, life felt steady. Not perfect, not magical, just steady. Somehow that felt even more valuable. Sebastian no longer appeared with long convoys or dramatic surprises. Instead, he showed up for ordinary things: school events, weekend cookouts, pancake breakfasts that Sophie insisted were official family traditions. The children seemed happiest of all. Oliver and Sophie moved through life as though they had known each other forever. Watching them together made it impossible to remember a time when they had been strangers. One Saturday morning, nearly a year after the snowstorm, I stood in my kitchen making coffee when I noticed something unusual. Silence. Any parent knows silence is dangerous. I followed it into the backyard and stopped. Oliver and Sophie were sitting beneath the large oak tree near the fence. Between them lay dozens of crayon drawings scattered across the grass. I walked closer. Every drawing showed the same thing: a small house, a snowy night, 4 people standing together. My throat tightened. "You really like drawing this picture?" I said softly. Sophie smiled. "Because that was the day everything got better." Oliver nodded in agreement. Children had a way of simplifying truths adults spent years trying to understand. Later that evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Sebastian and I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The air smelled like pine trees and summer rain. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We did not need to. Some silences felt empty. Others felt like home. Finally, Sebastian reached into his jacket pocket. My heart immediately started racing. "Do not look so nervous," he said with a smile. "That does not help." I laughed despite myself. Then he handed me a small wooden box. The same calm confidence remained in his expression. But I could see something else, too. Hope. I opened the box slowly. Inside was a simple ring. Elegant. Timeless. Nothing flashy. Nothing excessive. Perfect. "Emma," he said quietly, "the most important night of my life began because you opened a door." Emotion caught in my throat. "Sebastian." He shook his head gently. "You gave my son peace. You gave me a second chance. You gave us a family before either of us knew we needed one." Tears blurred my vision. Somewhere inside the house, I heard faint footsteps. Seconds later, Sophie and Oliver appeared in the doorway. Neither looked surprised. In fact, Both wore identical grins. "Say yes," Sophie whispered loudly. Oliver nodded. "Definitely say yes." I laughed through tears. Then I looked back at Sebastian, at the man who had arrived frozen, exhausted, and lost. The man who had become my closest friend before becoming something more. "Yes," I whispered. Relief flooded his face. The children cheered so loudly that birds scattered from nearby trees. Years later, whenever people asked how our story began, they expected something extraordinary, a grand event, a dramatic twist. But the truth was much simpler. On the coldest night of winter, someone knocked on my door. I opened it. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness changes every chapter that comes after.